Analysts, journalists, and politicians all across the country have seemingly come to the same conclusion that Gen Z is beginning to notice. Notice, a tongue-in-cheek way of describing the public's questioning of the U.S. relationship to Israel and policy in the Middle East. It's a phrase that can really mean anything critical of the state of Israel and U.S. foreign policy, but we know it best as the Gen Z way of calling out the biggest cohort of corruption and scandal in American history. Whether it's the left's Hasan Piker or Ana Kasparian and their scathing moral critiques of the United States' relationship to Israel and involvement in military actions in Gaza, or the right's Nick Fuentes and his America First movement, Tucker Carlson's pragmatic Western Hemisphere politics, or even just the fun of Candace Owens' conspiracy theories. One point remains the same. It's time for Americans to wake up. But how did we get here? It was only a few years ago that recognition of a Palestinian identity, let alone a Palestinian statehood, was entirely taboo in American media. Organizations like the ADL made it impossible to have rational discourse, and made it seemingly impossible to have conversations surrounding Middle Eastern foreign policy without waves of censorship, condemnations, and boycotting. However, in 2026, the conversation has expanded, now including a diversity of opinions, rationales, and interests, all regarding our relationship to the Middle East. A fight is still ahead of us for those who claim to champion free speech, those who claim to champion American sovereignty, but up until now, much has been gained. And so today, I'd like to examine how exactly we got here, how this conversation has begun, and how it's allowed to continue, and if it will be. Today, I'd like to examine the objective history of the Great Noticing. Folks, welcome back to The Narrative with me, your host, Will Sexton, the host with the most and the most GamerGate upvotes. Folks, new poll from NBC arrived yesterday that has absolutely shocked the online discourse, revealing that over 74% of Gen Z holds more sympathy for the Palestinians than the Israelis in the ongoing grander Middle Eastern conflict, with most of America being critical of war with Iran and Gen Z overwhelmingly being critical of war with Iran, showing that definitively the stranglehold over American support and American media narratives held by Israel has faded away in the most recent generation. And this has left many people asking, how exactly did we get here? I mean, my channel, despite the fact that I'm not a hateful guy, I've yet to make any content that is prejudicial, bigoted, or in many ways even overtly political. It seems that I have fans who are both right-wing and left-wing, and I more so posit myself as objective history. Even a channel like mine, for many, many years, probably would not have been allowed to have these conversations. It would have been seen as either socially taboo or institutionally taboo, and yet we are here today. It begs a greater question. What happened here? Why are we all having this conversation? Why is it that this topic seems to be on everybody's mind, and the figures within it seem to be gaining more and more success? Well, I call this show The Narrative for that reason. I find the construction of narratives and the construction of historical movements very fascinating. Consider myself a student of. And what better way to explain our current circumstances than to understand the history around our current circumstances? All of this begins in a much grander timeline. A grander timeline that is undeniably pushed by the right. Because while yes, there are many left-wing thinkers who have put forward great contributions to the grander question of free speech and our relationship to the Middle East, it was largely the right that had to deal with mass censorship. So much so that even the current president of the United States, despite what we all know about his opinions in relations to Middle Eastern policy, he himself was part of being censored. And so now we're here today. We're in a place where we're allowed to have a rational and reasonable discussion about Middle Eastern foreign policy, something that I myself attempt to do every single day on my channel. So before we get into the story, be sure to like, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified anytime I make a new post, and be sure to follow me on my other platforms. But today, folks, I'd like to hop into the story, really the story of modern politics and modern media, as it were. A story that begins in the hot and hazy summer of 2014, in an era that would go on to change American politics forever. I'm speaking, of course, about GamerGate. Now, GamerGate merits not just its own video, but its own series of videos. GamerGate has been the subject of thousands of political dissertations, examinations, and just general badly written articles. I mean, GamerGate is so profoundly important to modern politics that I can't even, I really can't even begin to explain it. For brevity's sake, I'm going to attempt to give you the most, shorthand version possible. In August of 2014, Aaron Joni, the ex-boyfriend of game developer Zoe Quinn, makes a blog post detailing his relationship, or really the termination of his relationship with Zoe Quinn over her alleged infidelity. In the Zoe post, he alleges that Zoe Quinn cheated on him with a series of game journalists in exchange for positive reviews on her indie game. You have to remember, this is when Minecraft first blew up, and so back then, if you made an indie game and a game journal, a website, I don't know, a Kotaku, I don't even know. If any of these publications reviewed you positively, you actually had a significant chance of making it really big. So it made more sense in the era. He details and recounts their breakup, something that to this day we don't know whether or not it was true. All of these were just allegations. We actually have no idea whether or not she did in fact cheat on her boyfriend for positive reviews. We don't know. But saying that GamerGate was about Zoe Quinn and her infidelity is like saying that the movie Fight Club is about a fight club. It's about a lot more than just the surface level here. What ended up happening was a mass scale and largely coordinated, decentralized attack on Zoe Quinn, and then further expanding into feminists within the video game industry like Anita Sarkeesian. See, what GamerGate was this post goes out and it acts as a catalyst. It acts as a spark point for thousands upon thousands of young, disenfranchised men. GamerGate very quickly goes from being one man versus the alleged infidelity of his ex-girlfriend to men versus the establishment, the status quo, the liberal status quo. What GamerGate did was it introduced two very, very important things into online politics. First, what it did was it introduced the radicalization of young men across the country. See, at that time, many young men were beginning to feel as if they were being boxed out of popular society. Young, disenfranchised, and largely feeling alone, GamerGate was a chance for them to coalesce around one issue and realize that there was a group of them, that there were others who felt like them, that they did not feel alone in their distaste for modernity, their distaste for what they saw as the feminization or masculization of American society and American media. And in realizing that there was more than just themselves, they were able to coalesce and group together and demand real-world physical change and demand real-world action, something that was then quickly weaponized by the second most important part, the birth of the political influencer. See, around GamerGate was a series of political influencers: Anita Sarkeesian, Brianna Wu, Sargon of Akkad, Richard Spencer. All these different people began to spawn in that era surrounding the whole GamerGate fiasco. This was the birth of a new kind of pundit. See, people don't really remember. I think my audience is old enough, but maybe some of you aren't. There was a time in this country where political punditry was exclusively on the news. It was exclusively a bipartisan talking head that existed on a news channel that would come out in a suit and read you what happened in the White House that day. And it was seen as a virtue to be sort of centrist. It was seen as a virtue to reach across the aisle, to give the benefit of the doubt, and to have conversations that largely structured around the debate rather than the debate of individuals. GamerGate was the first time in which we see the rise of the explicitly political influencer, somebody who is not beholden to the interests and legacy of mainstream media, and someone who it's not seen as a virtue to reach across the aisle. It's not seen as a virtue to be a centrist. Actually, it's seen as heresy to do so, and that it's strict orthodoxy, strict partisanship that is considered virtuous in this dynamic. When young men turn on Sargon of Akkad, they want to watch him own the feminists. They don't want to watch him have a spirited debate with the feminist that then seeks the betterment of the American society in rational and nuanced discourse. No, they want to watch their opponents, their political enemies, be squashed. That's what they want. And this expands outwards, not just on the right, but on the left as well. This is truly the birth of the political influencer. And it's around this time that other organizations begin to spawn. This is when the Daily Wire begins to find its footing, with people like Ben Shapiro taking major advantage from this moment to establish his brand as a hyper-orthodox, no pun intended, partisan pundit who explicitly says one political line and will not concede it in any capacity. This is a very new invention, and it spawns at this time. It's also at this time a very important figure, Steve Bannon, would take over Breitbart following the passing of, well, Breitbart. Bannon has said on record several times that GamerGate was the blueprint for the Trump campaign, that he saw GamerGate and realized something that other political analysts and pundits and really anybody in politics had not seen yet, which was the mass mobilization of online, largely anonymous forces. That politics in the modern day could meme itself into existence. A direct form of messaging, a form populist sentiment that he would go on to put into the Trump campaign. I mean, this was the centerpiece of the Trump campaign. One of the big things about Donald Trump when he first ran was the fact that he was hyper-orthodox in his stances. You have to understand the Republican Party prior to Donald Trump was like McCain or Mitt Romney, okay? It was like old statesmen debating tax policy with the Democrats, and it was seen as virtuous and lovely that they would step out in their suit and shake hands and rational, secular, positive actors. No, Trump was a complete departure from that and adopted the GamerGate style of hyper-orthodox politics. It was no longer Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, versus the well-spirited, rational, logical Democrat candidate. It was Donald Trump versus the forces of evil. This comes directly out of the GamerGate era. GamerGate, this is when many young men first become political and believe that their problems are now the cause of politics. Something which does have some truth to it. I mean, politics changed immensely in the 2010s. It is undeniable that the era of woke really dominated the 2010s, and as a reasonable response, young men, specifically young white men, were very upset about this. And it's in this that we find the formations of the alt-right. The alt-right basically brings back paleoconservatism in a big, big way. Now, paleoconservatism, again, that deserves its own series of videos. But when you think of like Nick Fuentes, that's a paleoconservative. It's conservatism that's very like rooted in conserving Christianity, European society. It's an identitarian form of conservatism, as opposed to neoconservatism. That's what you think of when you think of like a Republican. All of this, in its most early stages, climaxes at probably the most important event in modern politics. An event that we really don't talk about that much, but I would argue in 50 years' time, we will consider one of the most important and consequential events of American political history. I'm speaking, of course, about Unite the Right. Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. Unite the Right is probably one of the most dissected events in American political history of recent years, second only to January 6th. You guys remember Unite the Right. Remember the tiki torches, the marching, remember Charlottesville, Virginia? That was Unite the Right. That was a rally put together by Richard Spencer alongside others as the first real-world movement of this online movement. It was the first time in which this online movement attempted to step out of virtual space and into real space as a show of force. Now, the actual reason behind Unite the Right was they were protesting the removal of a Confederate statue from a park in Charlottesville, Virginia. But that's probably like not even an inch of the iceberg that is Unite the Right. I mean, the real reason behind it was a show of force of this online movement. It was to basically test the mettle of this online movement and show that, yes, we are real people, we are here, and we are organized. Now, Unite the Right didn't actually achieve anything. Like, the statue got taken down, and many consider Unite the Right to have actually been a disaster for the right wing, which it kind of was, and it was just absolutely terrible. The messaging was terrible. It looked terrible. It wasn't a good time. Okay, a lot of people got in a lot of trouble. It didn't really work. The reason I mention all of this is because Unite the Right, many people don't know, is the definitive and de facto starting point, at least in the mainstream opinion, the career, legacy, and politics of arguably one of the most important figures in modern politics today. Someone who has, especially in the last few years, shown himself to potentially be a new kingmaker, become a new true mover and shaker in American politics, whether you're on the left or the right. However, back then, he was just a kid with some ideas, swept up into the same movement as hundreds of thousands, if not millions of others just like him. I'm speaking, of course, about one Nick Fuentes. You can't talk about this stuff without talking about Fuentes. You have to. And I try to avoid talking about him on the channel because, one, I don't want to risk losing my mutual with him on X. Big achievement of mine. Just saying. But also because there's so many implications that come with that, and his fans are very, very dedicated. You get the idea. But it is undeniable that his contribution to this is one that starts there and continues onward in a profound and impactful way. People don't realize that Unite the Right, that's when we got to meet him. That was his introduction to the world stage. His first original doxing occurred after Unite the Right. He was doxed, him, his life, his address, and his little known, very humbly watched live stream was plastered all over mainstream media, which at the time was like very bad for him. Doxing's not good, but oddly enough, it was their doxing of him that put him in front of people, put his platform in front of people, and gained him his first instance of a cult-like following. In the aftermath of Unite the Right, a lot of people who began to identify themselves with Fuentes' politics and points began to coalesce around him, his live stream, and his online presence. A group of people who we'd go on to call the groypers. Now, what made Fuentes so unique was several key distinctions. His show marks itself as different because it is more for an explicitly younger audience. He speaks to Gen Z in a more authentic and real way. He has more of a hold over young Gen Z men at the time because he's really just like them. He is a middle-class young white man from middle America, from Chicago. And it's through this that he continues to grow in his platform. But one of the things that he notes and becomes sort of a central part of his politics is what he really describes as a betrayal by the establishment right, by what he calls Con Inc. Basically, his argument is that after Charlottesville, after Unite the Right, that the mainstream right, the Republican Party, failed to defend all of the right-wingers involved and instead capitulated to the left, and in his eyes, sold out all of these people who were fierce and staunch supporters. A line of allegiance that he believes begins and ends with support for Israel, that the Republican establishment, the Con Inc., meaning like conservative Inc., as if it was a corporation, that they'll never be able to side with the American people, with American patriots, with the America Firsters, the groypers, because they're sided with Israel. And their politics align with the state of Israel. And so while, yes, there's still a fight that needs to be had against the SJW feminists, whatever, from the GamerGate era, he really argues that the biggest enemy the America First crowd is going to have isn't on the left, it's the establishment of the right. It's breaking into the establishment right rather than taking down the establishment and mainstream left. This is a sentiment that only grows more and more in his online community, culminating in 2019's Groyper Wars. Again, that deserves its own video. Also, objectively hilarious, let me note. If you get the chance to sit and watch those archive streams, you absolutely should. They were they're fucking gold. They're gold. I don't know what you want me to tell you, okay? Whatever your politics are, they were gold. They were so fucking funny. Besides the point, what the Groper Wars did was it took Fuentes from being this sort of fringe online streamer to being a real political force. This was the first time the Republican Party in America felt the physical presence of Nick Fuentes. This is the first time in which he touched the GOP, showing them that, yes, I have the ability to manifest people into real space who will be near you, who will be in front of you, and you'll never know it. Basically, what Fuentes would do is he would get his supporters at XYZ college. Kirk travels to, University of Arizona. He would find groypers who were at University of Arizona and would say to them, you're going to go to the question and answer line and fuck with the guy. And that's what they do. They would line up and just ask questions about Israel, foreign allegiances, traditionalism. Really everything that we consider part and parcel with the America First or groyper ideology. They were asking questions related to that, to Charlie Kirk and other figures who were at these events. Regardless, the point was still the same. Nothing was actually attempting to be achieved here. The goal was to touch the Republican Party. It was to say, hey, I'm here, I'm behind the desk, and I have my minions who will touch you. They will be in your vicinity, they are real, they are young, and they are motivated. And it was through this that he began to develop an even bigger audience, and the GOP decided to make an enemy, an explicit enemy, out of him and anybody who was critical of Israel. And yet it's all of this that set the stage for a grander departure, a grander coalition of voices that would form that would make up the bulk of today's noticing. I'm speaking, of course, about the firing or de facto leaving, breakup, divorce, I don't know how you'd want to describe it, of two very important figures that oddly enough coincide with this timeline. Speaking, of course, about Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. To this day, we don't fully know why Tucker Carlson left Fox News. What we do know is that Tucker Carlson, all throughout the first Trump administration, built himself up as the Fox News Donald Trump guy. A populist, a pragmatist, a whisperer to the American public to explain the moves of the White House and to sympathize with Donald Trump. However, 2020 rolls around and things change. Things change quickly. Fox News gets caught in a lawsuit with Dominion Voting Systems. They settled with Fox admitting that they aired purposely false information regarding Dominion Voting Systems, saying that their product, that their voting machines were changing votes and rigging the election. They got sued for that, and they basically settled and said, yeah, okay, we knew that was false, we knew that was bullshit, and we still put it on the air. Tucker Carlson was like the centerpiece of that. He was the main one pushing that on Fox. And so it's also around this time that his text messages are subpoenaed, and the court finds out that Carlson doesn't like Donald Trump anymore. Really doesn't like Donald Trump. He doesn't like the Fox executives. He's wildly more conservative behind the scenes than he is publicly. And several of his employees come forward and allege him of misogyny, anti-Semitism, etc., etc. All of this culminating with Tucker Carlson leaving Fox News. All of these three figures would become absolutely consequential following, arguably, one of the most important events in geopolitics in a very long time. I'm speaking, of course, about October 7th. Now, let me be clear for the channel here. Let me be clear. I condemn October 7th. I condemn the attacks on innocent Israelis. I condemn all of that. I think it's terrible. I think it was a terrible move. I think it was unjust. And I'm not here to give any opinion, any conspiracy, anything on that. I have nothing to say about that other than my prayers for the families of victims and hope for the future at large. But what needs to be noted is that October 7th was a definitive, watershed moment in modern politics. It's where a lot happened, and probably in the future I'll do a further breakdown on that. I think in 100 years' time, we're going to look back on October 7th like how we look back on Gavrilo Princip. But in the meantime, we can say this, which is that October 7th was a turning point for everybody. This is when somebody like a Fuentes begins to gain more appeal, because now people are talking about Israel and Palestine, Gaza, AIPAC in a very, very real and tangible way. October 7th was the start of a war that is literally still going on today, that I talk about on this channel basically every single day. I mean, this is a very important moment in the history of Middle Eastern politics. And it's at this time that a lot of questions are beginning to be raised. See, all of the formerly left-wing dominated pro-Palestine spaces are failing to account for the media's reaction. They're failing to bring up questions that need to be brought up. Questions that can only be answered by an America First platform. Questions about loyalty, citizenship, intrigue, corruption, scandal, agenda, etc. All these things that we now associate with Fuentes and his America First movement. All those questions are beginning to be raised, and the left doesn't have an answer. They are completely without answer. And it's at this time that people start to turn to a figure like Fuentes and realize that maybe the guy has some points about certain things. Maybe the guy has some points about politics and about our relationship to the Middle East. People begin rewatching the Groper Wars. They begin rewatching his streams and catching up with him live. It's also at this time that Candace Owens, a recent convert to Catholicism, feels that she can no longer be silent about the treatment of the Palestinians and begins to speak out against the actions of the Israeli government, something that, of course, gets her definitively fired from Daily Wire, and she goes on her own, becomes independent, and starts her own show. And as Tucker Carlson is building his YouTube presence, this is the perfect time. And he begins to start spelling narratives surrounding Israel and comes out as an institutional actor against Israel and against Israeli action in American politics specifically, interviewing notable pro-Palestine figures, priests, thinkers, religious figures, the works. In doing so, all three of these people start to establish themselves as anti-Israel, anti-establishment figures representing the American public, something that has a deep and wide appeal. All of this culminating, obviously, at the generational run. I really don't want this to be like a Fuentes Glaze video. I really don't. But like, if you're going to talk about the rise of noticing or talk about the rise of the great noticing, you have to talk about him. He played a central role, and like, you can't deny that. January 2024, Donald Trump gets elected again, okay? And it's from there that censorship gets rolled back. This is kind of when woke definitively dies, and all the funders of woke, all the people who funded woke programs, they're gone. And woke dies as we know it. And the American public begins to go the other way. And so within that, like, censorship on social media begins to scale back. Obviously, this coincides with the rise of TikTok, which is very notably uncensored, or at least uncensored to American politics, because it was owned by China at the time. On TikTok, on Instagram, which aren't as censored as before, they're not beholden to the interests of the ADL, who had like a death grip on advertising for a very long time as a advocate organization. Now, these platforms exist. They're mostly populated with young people, and the young people begin to question our relationship to Israel. And these platforms are where it happens. This is where clipping happens. And Fuentes goes on his generational run because people start clipping his show. See, his show is like hard to access even today. Today you have to go on Rumble. I don't want to go on Rumble. No one wants to go on Rumble. Rumble's terrible. But the fact that he was banned from like every platform for his speech, the fact that he was hated by all these institutional actors, it would make sense that Gen Z, who doesn't trust the institutional actors and doesn't trust the mainstream platforms, they would see someone who's banned by all those things as like a mark of, like a badge of honor. They'd see him as someone who's accomplished. They go, oh, wow, he must be saying something dangerous and truthful. And of course, what he was talking about was our relationship to Israel. And so now all of these young people are getting clips, little bite-sized segments of Fuentes talking about Israel, and they're making sense to the young people. They like what he has to say. They enjoy his points. They like his views. The left and the right. I mean, literally the left and the right, they both are saying, yeah, this guy has a point when it comes to our relationship to Israel. Maybe it's a bit deeper than we think it is. And maybe a lot of it is being held up via corruption, via nepotism. And it's that moment, it's that specific moment that breaks open the floodgates. Suddenly, everyone is now interested in this topic of conversation. Suddenly, everyone you know is talking about this conversation. Suddenly, the Gen Z opinion on the conflict changes. People like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson owe their popularity with a younger crowd to this moment. Like, they owe it to them completely. Anybody who denies that, you're lying. They owe it to them completely, because it was in doing so that all of a sudden people are beginning to flirt with conservatism. People are beginning to flirt with the other side. I mean, Gen Z for a very long time was very, very staunchly left-wing. I myself was staunchly left-wing for many years. A lot of us were, and now that changes very, very quickly. And so now people are flirting with sources that were previously seen as incomprehensible. Like, how could we ever possibly talk to these people? And now we're fans of them. I mean, it was only a few years ago that like Candace Owens was just like laughed at as a conservative figure that everyone thought was crazy. And now like most young women watch Candace Owens. Like most women my age watch Candace Owens. And like, I could ask them, hey, what's Candace Owens up to this week? And they can recount to me whatever the fuck she's spinning up over there. And I mean, hey, God bless it, you know? I think it's great. I mean, God bless it. But like, this is where it starts. And it starts because Fuentes and his clips, like, he's a very clippable streamer. His show is very clippable. And the clips are huge on social media. So much so that like the left has been groyperfied. Like you have to understand, there has been so much of a cultural victory for someone like Fuentes that the left has been groyperized. Go look at how leftists talk now. They've been groyperized. I did a whole video about Anna Kasparian talking about the Goyim are awake. Like, you understand, like Hasan Piker streams and talks about the Epstein class. Like, what? Like, you understand, like, there was a time 10 years ago where that was fucking incomprehensible. And now that's just our political reality. And so it is objectively Fuentes who drove that. Like, objectively, you can't say what you want about him. Maybe you like him, maybe you don't. It doesn't matter. He drove that. You literally can't do anything about it. That's just a fucking fact. And all of this leads to today. In truth, I don't know. That's really all I can say is I don't know. And honestly, I'm terrified of it. I really am. I mean, I've found success in my documentaries. I love to talk about history. I love to talk about sort of taboo history and talk about this stuff and talk about our policy in the Middle East and the history surrounding it. I love talking about faith. I mean, all these things that I pride myself on. And I get worried because, 5 years ago, I don't think people were ready to have this conversation. I think some of the things I say, people weren't ready for. And I'm not attempting to make any sweeping generalizations of people. I don't make sweeping generalizations of people, but I just think the American public wasn't ready for a lot of these conversations. And so we find ourselves in an interesting position here, okay? And sometimes I get worried that my content will be lumped in with like actual bigotry that exists, because bigotry does exist. It does. You kind of have to be an idiot to say that it doesn't. I think what stopped existing is this like hyper focus and care on being perceived as bigoted, which led to a lot of points that aren't inherently bigoted to stop being classified as bigoted. Many have asked, why now? Why are the conversations allowed now? And really, I have two theories as to why, two main theories, but I can't confirm either of them, okay? These are just like from what I can witness, both from in front of the scenes with you guys and behind the scenes. It seems that one, like foreign actors have gotten involved a lot. Like I joke about how I tried to get money from Qatar and all that, and like it is funny, but it is objectively true that like Qatar has put money into media, like they have. And like there are very, very wealthy Muslims in the world. Like as much as there's wealthy Sheldon Adelsons in the world, there are wealthy Muslims in the world, and Muslims tend to like Palestine. Muslims tend to want Al-Aqsa back. And so it tracks that there would be people behind the scenes in like oil or weapons or whatever who would be giving money to platforms to like ensure that this type of messaging doesn't get as easily removed as it did in yesteryear. We also live in a more diverse America now. A more diverse America, a more religiously diverse America especially, is going to bring with it Muslims and bring with it people who support Palestine innately. And that's going to diversify the conversation. It's hard to have one agreed upon mainstream narrative when there's a diversity of people. My second theory, which is probably honestly more closer to the truth, is that I think Israel has adopted a new strategy. I think the politics of the sort of religious Zionists in America, I think the politics have changed. I said it on stream the other day, which by the way, you should totally join the stream sometime. I spoke about how for a very long time, the sort of vehicle of like AIPAC, the vehicle of Israeli interests in our government, was coming through the Democrat Party. It was innately liberal. This is because the Republican Party, despite evangelical support for Israel, was still like Christian in nature. It was still patriotic in nature, which those two things are not complementary with the Israeli state having a stake in American politics. And now we have this generation that just overwhelmingly dislikes Israeli influence on the American government, dislikes foreign influence in general, and is like incredibly skeptical of mainstream media. So it kind of makes sense that Israel would just like stop media efforts. It's kind of a waste of money and a waste of time. Really, all it ended up doing in the end was just furthering someone like Fuentes. Like if they had just allowed Fuentes to like be on YouTube or like to be on Twitch, he probably would not be as big as he is now. He probably would not. I've said it before, like just attempting to censor and attempting to just like shut things down, all it does is lend you credibility to Gen Z. Gen Z isn't like other generations where they don't trust the talking heads on TV. Most of us don't own TVs. I don't know anybody who owns cable. And so everyone is getting their sources from a diversity of places, and what's considered the most authentic is the one that is the smallest and the most like kept aside from the establishment. And I think Israel knows that. Like I think the ADL is well aware of that, and they know that if they just keep trying to play whack-a-mole with all these different figures popping up who dislike Israel, all they're going to do is waste a ton of money trying to shut down people when they could have spent money like on the cause of Israel. Like they could have spent money like on the cause of lobbying. Also, I've said it before, if they can achieve their goals in Iran, if they can achieve their goal of destabilizing Iran, it won't matter what anyone says because they'll be in control of Iran. Like they'll be in control of Iran's oil. Doesn't matter what anybody has to say about them anymore. They will become completely unsanctionable. It literally will not matter what they do. They could literally do anything and like no one could stop them, because they would control all the oil. They would control the Strait of Hormuz. Something that, which by the way, Iran currently controls the Strait of Hormuz. Look at how that's affecting the world. Like they say for a few hours, we're going to shut down the strait and the world turns to a halt. So imagine if Israel controlled it 24/7. I don't know. My hope is that we can continue to have this discussion. And I do want to make it very clear that I follow like all the rules here on YouTube. And I don't see my content as bad in any way. Like I am a very tame centrist political figure. Like, please do not misconstrue my content, I guess is what I want to say. Do not misconstrue my content as hateful or even targeted. Like, I explicitly try to state, and maybe I need to make it even more clear, I have no problems nor issues with people on the basis of immutable characteristics. That's a very low IQ thing to do, okay? To have an issue with somebody based on something they can't control, like their ethnicity or the faith they're born into, that doesn't make any sense, okay? That's not, I don't agree with that. I don't believe in that. I'm also not conspiratorial. I don't peddle in conspiracies. Everything that I say is very quickly confirmable. If you watch this channel thinking you found like a new spot to like, you know what I mean? Like do like online, like shut it out, you know, extremist politics, you're in the wrong place. That's not me. I'm not like that. And I don't want to be like that. I certainly can engage with that. I can certainly make jokes with that, you know, and I do, but that's not who I am. And I think those are political actors that should be allowed to survive. My fear is that the people who are not like that, the people who are shut it out, the people who are like genuinely hateful people, I think they might ruin it for the rest of us. I worry about that the people who are like idiots and genuinely hateful and genuinely possess like real and true racist sentiments, like those people are going to ruin it for everybody. But that's not me. I'm not that. That's not my take. That's not my opinion. My opinion is very strictly rooted within American patriotism and objective history. And really, moreover, what I care about deeply is free speech. I don't like the idea that anybody's speech would be censored or deplatformed. I mean, I'm very pro free speech. It's literally the First Amendment for a reason. It's the most important and foundational aspect of our country. Something that I think much of Gen Z recognizes and appreciates because they get it. I mean, we look at someone who is censored and we don't see them as a taboo, as there must be a reason. There must be a reason that we're putting them on the leper colony. No. We look at people who are censored and say, wow, they must be a truth teller. They must be challenging and threatening the powers that be. That's a key distinction about our generation that needs to be made. This is all to say, I have no idea where it's going to go. I have no idea if we elect a new president and then all of a sudden everything comes back and everything goes back to the era of you can't say anything and we can't have a rational conversation and yada, yada, yada. I don't know. But God willing, it doesn't. Until then, I'm glad we got to take a little dissection into this history and begin to understand this a little bit better and look towards the future with knowledge of the past. So as this war rages on, as the media narrative is always evolving, remember, everything starts somewhere, whether you notice it or not. Folks, that's going to do it for us today on this episode of The Narrative. I hope that you enjoyed. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, hit the bell to get notified whenever I make a new post. Folks, I said in the last video, be sure to follow my second channel. I'm going to start releasing clips from my stream on that second channel, little 8 to 10 minute clips once a day. So you're going to have, just so much content. 7 clips a week. That's 70 minutes a week just for you. So be sure to go subscribe there. Follow, stay up to date with me, join the stream sometimes, follow me on Kick and Rumble. Folks, with all that being said, thank you for stopping by. And as I always say, God bless you and God bless America. Until next time, folks.